Adrenal fatigue. As Kimberly mentioned, it's a really common problem. Maybe not everyone, but most everyone I see is suffering from some degree of adrenal fatigue. The tendency, I think, when we start on a topic like this is that it gets really complicated really quick. And when I originally was planning this talk, I kind of listed out like a bunch of hormones and kind of what they did. And I ran the talk by my husband. I got this like glassed over look, and I thought, okay, we'll start again. My goal today is not to bore you, so I'm hoping that I don't. I'm still going to touch on some of the main hormones related to adrenal fatigue, and my topic is going to be more specifically on sex hormones and how we can have an imbalance there as a cause of adrenal fatigue. Okay, so our adrenal glands, they're two glands that are located right above each kidney. And their main job is to produce adrenaline, cortisol, basically 30 different steroids and hormones. Louder? Okay. Tell me if it gets quiet again. Okay, so we have a lot of different stressors in our life. We have internal stressors, we have external stressors. I think we commonly think of stress as like mental, emotional stress, anxiety, worry, fear, but stress, it really goes well beyond that. So we also have a lot of internal stressors. These are things that can be stressing our body that we might not actually know they're going on. So things like that could be blood sugar imbalances, definitely is a stress to the body. Eating foods that don't support our metabolism. You know, if we have some sort of internal infection like parasites or bacterial infection, you know, a lot of times there's symptoms with that. Sometimes it's asymptomatic, and definitely the body's constantly working to fight stuff like that off. Other kinds of stress include physical or biomechanical stress, and this can be like nerve impingements, muscular injuries, you know, maybe some sort of imbalance in our skeletal system. For stuff like that, you know, maybe like a good chiropractor, physio, Pilates instructor to help relieve those stresses. But again, the body is also recognizing that as a stress. According to the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, medical dictionary, stress is actually defined as a physical, chemical, or emotional factor that causes bodily or mental tension and may be a factor in disease causation. And I thought that's really interesting that in the dictionary, it's actually recognizing that stress can cause disease, which it absolutely can. Okay, I'm going to flip to the next slide. So we're going to look at this first chart. This is the stages of adrenal dysfunction and adrenal fatigue, and this is, as practitioners, how we can identify and categorize adrenal dysfunction. On the left-hand side, you kind of see numbers running up the side. And what this is related to a total cortisol sum. So when we do functional lab testing, we'll look at cortisol levels. I think just taking one cortisol reading and getting a sum, it's not so useful. And again, I'll talk about why. We'll kind of see it in this chart. But adrenal fatigue is characterized based on your sum. So just to briefly mention what cortisol is, it is a steroid hormone. It follows a diurnal pattern for circadian rhythm, and what this means is that it starts off highest in the morning and it continues to drop throughout the day, reaching its lowest point about 3 to 4 hours after the onset of sleep. That's with normal functioning. With adrenal fatigue, we see all sorts of imbalances and inversions as to when cortisol is highest, when it's lowest. Cortisol also acts as a natural anti-inflammatory and painkiller. It's used to raise blood sugar. This is very much tied into that fight or flight stress response of we need energy to burn if we're going to fight for our life or we're going to, flee from it. Our modern day stresses, okay, they're usually not quite that serious, but our body still perceives it as a life or death situation. Cortisol also suppresses immune function, gastric emptying, and slowing down the digestion. So again, I'm going to talk about the hormone imbalances, but really adrenal fatigue, it kind of bleeds over into all other areas, and symptoms can kind of range hugely. Has anyone here ever experienced, like, you get a mosquito bite in a day and maybe you don't realize it, but when you go to get in bed, you like start scratching and scratching? Yeah. Yeah, okay, so I have a lot of heads shaking yes to this, and that, again, relates to those cortisol levels. So during the day, your cortisol is higher, you have that natural anti-inflammatory painkiller effect, and at night those levels are dropping off, and that's why, you start to really feel it and kind of go for it. Okay, so we've talked about cortisol. You see these different colored boxes. These are the different stages of adrenal fatigue. The very first box, which is the green box, it says adaptation. This is really where we want to be. This is when we are maintaining balance. So, okay, we might have some slight stressor. Life is never totally stress-free, of course, but our body responds to it, and we return back to normal. Maybe our boss yells at us at work, and then we have a moment about it, and we let it go, and things return. But what happens when stress continues is the body doesn't return back to balance as it should. So from there, I'm going to follow up the line into the yellow box, and this is our stage 1 adrenal fatigue. Here we have cortisol levels that are elevated. The total sum is actually higher at this point, and usually it doesn't last. So if the stress continues, things start to decline, and the body hits a point where it's not able to respond by producing enough cortisol. When people are in stage 1, what I see a lot of symptoms, they're really just not feeling as good as they used to. There's nothing diagnosable there, but maybe you go to the doctor. It's subclinical, so you really can't identify. Your doctor says, oh, maybe you need some rest, or it's in your head. There's nothing wrong with you, but actually things are starting. It's just on a level in the body that's not a diagnosable illness. Symptoms at this point, they relate to blood sugar imbalances. A lot of times sleep problems, maybe there's some weight gain and people are kind of struggling to drop those last few pounds. Hormones are feeling out of whack. You wake up in the morning and you don't feel quite rested. You feel a little slow to get going. So from here, the move from stage 1 to stage 2, it's different for every person. I mean, hopefully you can catch it at that stage 1 and kind of support your body and give it the rest it needs, and you go back to homeostasis. But otherwise, what happens is either the stress continues too long or additional stressors come in, and this moves us into the next phase. For some people, that happens really quickly. Maybe there's some big, huge life-altering event that happens, and the body kind of feels it like that. For other people, it really can take years and years to go into the next phase. The other thing I should mention that I sometimes see at stage 1 is for some people, they might actually feel better at this point. And it seems a little bit strange. They're under stress, but because the body's producing more cortisol and it has that painkiller effect, it raises energy levels. So there are some people that feel maybe better than they did. But again, usually it doesn't last, and it's kind of a matter of time before the situation starts to worsen. So from that yellow box, you can see cortisol levels, they're going back down. And we have this orange box, which is stage 2. As I mentioned, that just getting one total cortisol reading, it's really not enough. It's really helpful to see that pattern because we can identify certain hidden stressors based on where cortisol levels are high, where they're low. And if all we get is a total cortisol level, you can see that stage 2 and normal functioning is actually within the same range. The difference is with those individual cortisol ranges, at least one, if not more, is actually below the reference range. And if you don't have those individual readings, you're not going to be able to identify that. So you can think, oh, actually, you're functioning normally, when in fact, you're not. Okay, at this point, the body, resistance is weakening. Stress may be at the same level as I mentioned, or there's more stress. Symptoms here, they tend to be common but vague. Again, it's not necessarily diagnosable, but a lot of people are self-medicating at this point with a lot of over-the-counter drugs. It could also be natural therapies, but it's symptom treating, so you're not really getting to the underlying cause of the problem, but maybe it's the low energy levels or it's the headaches, but rather than over-the-counter drugs, you're using supplements and you're using herbs, which is good, but again, if you're not treating the problem, it's going to continue or it's going to show up in other ways. The other thing that you really see here is hormone imbalances are starting to come up, especially because of something called pregnenolone steal, which I'm going to tell you what it is and show you. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so this slide is our steroid hormone pathways. Pregnenolone is here in this first green box. It's basically made of B vitamins and dietary fats. And pregnenolone is considered our master hormone. And the reason for this is, can you hear me okay? Okay. As you can see that to produce all these other hormones, we have to have enough pregnenolone available. Okay, so from pregnenolone, if you go down to the second green box, this is DHEA. DHEA, it's another steroid hormone. It's produced in the adrenal cortex. It really works as a counter-regulatory agent for cortisol. So like the long-term negative effects of cortisol, DHEA, it helps to balance those. We need DHEA to make testosterone, so you can see again through these pathways. We have to have enough DHEA in place, as well as to make estrogen, and these are our estrogen. So for both men and women, we have all these hormones. Our bodies are just really smart, so if you're a man, okay, you need more testosterone. Our bodies know what to do, but with adrenal fatigue, we really start to see a lot of disruptions and low DHEA, so this is another marker that we look for in the functional lab testing that I do. It's really an early sign of adrenal fatigue. So when we have chronic stress, what we have, as I mentioned, it's called pregnenolone steal, and it's this high cortisol to DHEA ratio. And basically what happens, when the stress continues on and on, our body it does what it needs to try to deal with that stress. And it basically shunts pregnenolone through this pathway to make cortisol. And when that happens, we don't have enough pregnenolone to manufacture DHEA and our other sex hormones. And that's what pregnenolone steal is. The other issue here is when it goes on long term, you can, support the adrenals, come back to balance, but when this pathway has been in place, the body actually then starts to recognize this as the preferred pathway. So you really have to help aid the body remember its proper metabolic pathways for these other hormones. And the way I do that is through liquid bioidentical hormones. It's not hormone replacement therapy. It's very small amounts, the amounts that our bodies should be manufacturing, individualized for everyone's needs, so we kind of determine the right amount, and it helps to remind the body how to create these other hormones again. So with the hormone imbalances, there's so many symptoms that come up from this. So we can have a situation where we have not enough estrogen, and symptoms for that are hot flashes, night sweats, foggy thinking, tearful, depressed. It can be